Few films have quite the same reputation as The Social Network. It's often lauded as one of the best movies of the 2010s and considered a modern classic by many. To qualify as a classic, a film has to be timeless. And yet, this film adapts the real-life events behind the creation of a platform that many would consider to be outdated. To fully understand how it's managed to maintain this status, though, we have to start with the film's production. It was written by Aaron Sorkin, a legendary playwright known for his fast-paced and witty dialogue. It was loosely based on the book The Accidental Billionaires. I say loosely because, despite the fact that the film credits this book, they were actually being written around the same time, with Sorkin and the book's author, Ben Mesrich, only meeting up a few times to compare notes. Another important note is that Sorkin still maintains that this movie is almost entirely based on the 3 testimonies made during the legal depositions represented within the film. Obviously, checking the validity of that is nearly impossible, but writing a story within those confines itself is impressive. Initially, Sorkin was also set to make his directorial debut with The Social Network, but after contacting David Fincher, it was decided Fincher would direct. David Fincher's most known film is undoubtedly Fight Club, which I haven't seen, and I already know I need to fix that at some point. For now, though, let's take a look at what has kept The Social Network relevant after all these years, and whether it deserves to be called a modern classic. I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say this is one of the greatest opening scenes of all time. The dialogue is incredibly fast-paced and witty, and with how much information being thrown at us, we're likely going to become confused. And that's the point. This is Mark's current girlfriend, Erica Albright, and she's also confused as to what exactly they're talking about. All these misunderstandings help the conversation flow naturally from one topic to another in rapid succession. In this one scene, we're introduced to Eduardo and his money, which is incredibly relevant later on, along with numerous aspects of Mark's personality. He clearly is quite egotistical, yet also insecure. He has no problem talking about his achievements and is easily offended. We're also introduced to Mark's motivation, goal, and greatest failure. Mark plainly states that he wants to distinguish himself from the crowd. Being a genius isn't enough anymore. He needs something else to stand out. His goal at this moment is to get into a final club, which is apparently Harvard's version of fraternities. And his greatest failure, from his perspective, is this very conversation. After Erica breaks up with him, Mark heads home. During his walk back to his dorm, we're hit with the main theme, Hand Covers Bruise. This is one of the most recognizable themes in cinema, and it perfectly captures the loneliness Mark feels. In fact, this whole soundtrack is incredible. Both the original score and the adapted songs work extremely well. To take his mind off of Erica, Mark does the only logical thing. He hacks into each individual house on Harvard's campus, downloads their Facebooks, and uploads all the girls to a site that lets you choose which of the 2 options is hotter. It's here where we're formally introduced to Eduardo. And we might as well get this out of the way. Andrew Garfield does an incredible job in this role. He's one of my favorite actors, and this is one of his all-time best performances. And while we're talking about acting, I should also mention Jesse Eisenberg's performance. It's been said that he was born to play this role, and I couldn't agree more. I genuinely couldn't imagine anyone else playing Mark Zuckerberg. The montage of Mark creating this website is great. I'm not sure how many times I'll have to compliment the fast pace of the dialogue, but, yet again, this is the strongest part of the scene. Mark names the site Face Mash. Obviously, in terms of morals, making a site where you rate people against one another based on attractiveness is not a good thing to do. But we have to remember the context of the scene as well. Mark is drunk, heartbroken, and 19 years old. The way the scene is edited, with the constant cuts back and forth between the parties and Mark's hacking, creates a parallel between Mark and his college classmates. Yes, what Mark is doing is wrong, but he isn't a far worse person than the people around him. This is further proved by the fact that the site becomes wildly popular on campus. Overnight, the site gets 22,000 hits and crashes Harvard's servers, and Mark is clearly proud of himself. After all, he's finally done something to distinguish himself from the crowd.
Called in front of the administrative board.
No, back. I mean, that's...
This is our first deposition scene. We as an audience already know that Mark Zuckerberg will go on to create Facebook, which will be a massive success. For that reason, telling this story in chronological order could become boring. By jumping forward to the present, while telling a bulk of the story through depositions, Aaron Sorkin accomplishes two things. Firstly, he focuses the audience's attention on the how rather than the what. Since we already know what happens, we care more about how it happens. For example, when we see that Eduardo is suing Mark, we're naturally going to ask the question, how did this happen? This keeps us engaged throughout the story as we look for the answer to that question. The second thing this approach to storytelling accomplishes is that it makes it clear to us that we can't trust anything we see or hear. The first thing Mark says when we cut to the deposition is, "That's not what happened." He also goes on to allude to the fact that people lie under oath all the time. Sorkin wanted it to be clear to the audience that we are experiencing this story as it is being told by unreliable narrators. Those narrators being Mark, Eduardo, the Winklevoss twins, and Divya. Mark's stunt with face mash attracts the attention of the Winklevoss twins and Divya Narendra. They have an idea for a social networking site called Harvard Connection. This would be a traditional social networking site, except it would be exclusive to those with the harvard.edu email. Mark seems intrigued by the idea until Divya makes one fatal mistake. He implies that Mark needs to rehabilitate his image and that this could help him do that. Mark is clearly offended by this, even repeating Erica's line from earlier in the film.
Wow, you would do that for me.
Back when Erica said it, he didn't understand the sarcasm, but now he's even using the phrase for himself. That implies some kind of character development, but more importantly, it shows that Erica is still a motivating factor for him. The reason he even responds this way in the first place, though, is because he doesn't care for the implication that he needs them. In this moment, he comes to the realization that he doesn't need to join a final club. He receives a higher goal. He's going to create his own final club where he's the president, that club being the Facebook. He agrees to join Divya and the Winklevoss twins in order to stall them while he goes and creates his own website. He immediately pitches the idea to Eduardo, and Eduardo agrees to fund the project. They split the company 70-30 and development begins on the Facebook. That's not all for this scene, though. Just before Mark pitches the idea to Eduardo, Eduardo tells him that he's been punched by the Phoenix, a popular final club. Mark is clearly jealous of this, and immediately after bringing it up, Eduardo tries to change the topic after seeing how Mark reacted. In the present day, when questioned about potentially being jealous of Eduardo, Mark makes an immature joke about how he could buy the Phoenix Club and make it his ping-pong room. While he may think this is impressive, this childish response to an attack on his character is confirmation of his jealousy. And this is one of the major factors of the social network that allow it to endure as a classic. Yes, this is the story of a creation of a website, but more than that, it's a story of betrayal, jealousy, and friendship lost. As the story progresses, we'll dive more into those themes, but for now, we only have small glimpses into what causes Eduardo and Mark's fallout. Mark leads on the Winklevoss twins and Divya for months, while secretly working on the Facebook. In the present, the Winklevoss twins and Divya are suing him, claiming that he stole their idea. Mark maintains he did nothing wrong, though, since he didn't use any of their code in the creation of the Facebook, and had changed the basic principle of the site from a dating site to more of an online final club.
I really don't need a forensics team to get to the bottom of this. If you guys were the inventors of Facebook, you'd have invented Facebook.
Finally, the Facebook goes live. Mark makes a masthead and puts his and Eduardo's names on it. We know that all Mark cares about is standing out, making a name for himself. So it makes sense he'd ensure that his name is plastered on every page. But why share the credit with Eduardo? Especially if, as some people suggest, they were never really friends, and Mark was only using Eduardo. It only makes sense that Mark put Eduardo's name there because, at this point, they were genuinely friends. And Mark recognizes he couldn't have done this without him. The masthead is extremely significant, as it serves as a reflection of Mark's character at three very different points in the film, which we'll talk about more as they come. The Facebook is immediately a hit on campus, and Mark finally gets the recognition he feels he deserves. While in Mark's dorm, Eduardo finds a cease and desist letter sent by the Winklevoss twins. This conversation makes it clear to the audience that while Mark is grateful for Eduardo's funding, he still takes all the credit for the Facebook's creation. And when defending himself during the deposition, we see his reasoning for this. It's motivated by his ego. He thinks no one else has the capacity to create or even understand what he's doing, so why bother them with the details? He didn't tell Eduardo about the cease and desist letter because he didn't think it was Eduardo's business, failing to realize that 30% of it, quite literally, is Eduardo's business. Well, I guess business would be overstating at this point. To qualify as a business, you have to make money, but Mark doesn't want to monetize the site yet, since he thinks it'll make it less cool. Despite him masking his concerns about advertising as an actual business issue, at the end of the day, he isn't motivated by money. He's motivated by
Erica?
After Mark spots Erica from across the club, she makes it clear she doesn't want to speak to him. This gives him the motivation to expand the Facebook even more. This goes all the way back to when she first broke up with him. He needed something to take his mind off of her, and yet again, he does this by fully immersing himself in his work. Although admittedly, this time it's a bit more serious. He gives 5% of the company to his friend Dustin and has him help with programming. He also decides to expand the Facebook to Yale and Columbia. Eduardo also has the idea to expand to Stanford, since it's about time the Facebook reached Silicon Valley. From a business perspective, this is a brilliant idea. They're much more likely to find investors there. However, this move marks the beginning of the end for Mark and Eduardo. This is Sean Parker, founder of Napster, a site that allowed people to download and share music for free. And now he's discovered the Facebook and wants to meet with Mark Zuckerberg. While on a trip to New York in order to find advertisers, Eduardo and Mark meet with Sean. And the way this scene is done is incredible. From the editing, acting, and especially the dialogue, everything about this scene is perfect. The way the dialogue seamlessly transitions us from past to present allows necessary exposition to be given in a natural way. It's clear that Eduardo doesn't trust Sean, and it's easy to see why. While yes, Sean did have a few successful businesses, they were all temporary, with Sean jumping ship before they completely sank. None of that matters to Mark, though, who is completely won over by Sean by the end of the conversation. Even to the point of changing the site's name to just Facebook after Sean requested it. I will say this though, obviously Sean has his own agenda here, but he does have some good ideas. For instance, not putting ads on the site yet so it doesn't lose its appeal, and also requesting that Mark comes out to California for the summer. That's where the big investors are. This was the whole reason Eduardo wanted to expand the Facebook to Stanford in the first place. Eduardo isn't completely sure about this move to California, though. During the deposition, an article is referenced that claims Eduardo was torturing a chicken. To set the scene, Eduardo had finally gotten into the Phoenix, and as part of his initiation, he had to carry a chicken around with him at all times for a week. While eating dinner one night, Eduardo fed the chicken some of his dinner, which happened to be chicken. Somehow this story ends up reaching the Harvard newsletter, The Crimson, and Eduardo is accused of animal cruelty. By itself, this scene doesn't matter much. What makes it interesting, though, is that later in the film, Eduardo questions if Mark was the one that planted the story. Mark denies it, but that would make sense. Eduardo had just gotten into the Phoenix, which we know Mark was jealous of. And Mark also needed leverage in order to force Eduardo to fund his move to California. All that being said, though, realistically, did Mark plant the story about the chicken? Maybe, but this is never explicitly said in the movie, so we have no reason to believe it one way or the other. And this ties back into the unreliable narrators telling this story. We can't trust anybody. We only see the things mentioned in the deposition rooms, and these accounts are told in a way that make the ones telling the story look as good as possible. So there really is no way to know for sure what's true and what isn't. This is such an intriguing way to tell a story, and I feel it's a very underrated aspect of this film. Eventually, Eduardo gives Mark $18,000 to move out to California temporarily and hire 2 more employees. Meanwhile, he would go to New York to drum up advertiser interest for the site. The 3 months they spend apart here would prove to be a fatal blow to their friendship, though. Suddenly, Sean Parker shows up on Mark's doorstep, and after finding out Eduardo isn't there, immediately gets to work at inserting himself into the company. He delivers an incredible speech to Mark, promising him everything he's ever wanted. He shares his story of how he came up with Napster, which is oddly similar to Mark's heartbreak that inspired FaceMash. He tells Mark that he can help him get Facebook going in Europe, and after telling Mark everything he wants to hear, he goes after Eduardo, saying that he should be here, not in New York. Sean also mentions how he's currently homeless, to which Mark gladly invites him to come and live with them. And all of this happened exactly according to Sean's plan. There's no way Sean happened to be staying across the street, exactly where Mark was living. He mentions later that he read Mark's blog, so he's clearly done his research. It's also a possibility that Christy, Eduardo's girlfriend, told him. After all, the meeting between Mark and Sean was set up by Christy initially. Of course, none of this is ever stated in the movie, but that makes sense, as Sean Parker was never deposed at any point. Either way, though, it's clear that Mark looks up to Sean, and the similarities in how they got started caught Mark's attention. Mark asks Sean if he ever still thinks about the girl that inspired him to create Napster. Sean looks confused on why Mark would even ask that, and says no. And that's the major difference between Mark and Sean. Mark still desires that human connection, he still has his soul. Meanwhile, Sean's traded in his soul for pure ego.
I'm gonna call you back.
Finally, Eduardo comes to California, only to find out that he's been effectively replaced by Sean. Sean set up meetings all across town with potential investors. Mark plainly states that if Eduardo doesn't come out to California, he's going to be left behind. In response, Eduardo freezes the account funding Mark's stay in California in order to get his attention. This doesn't end up working, though, as Peter Thiel, one of the investors Sean set up a meeting with, invests $500,000 in the company and sets them up in an office. In order for this deal to go through, though, Eduardo has to fly back to California to sign the documents. This would prove to be Eduardo's greatest mistake. Without a second thought, having complete faith in his friend, he signs the documents, awarding him a 34% share of Facebook. While he goes back to Harvard for another semester, Mark and Sean play a stunt that attracts new investors. Eduardo was told that his shares would dilute if new investors came, but he had no idea what they had in store for him.
You signed the papers. You set me up. You're gonna blame me because you were the business head of the company and you made a bad business deal with your own company?
It's gonna be like I'm not a part of Facebook.
It won't be like you're not a part of Facebook. You're not a part of Facebook.
My name's on the masthead.
You might want to check again.
As mentioned previously, Eduardo's name on the masthead is representative of Mark's character, at one point putting his desire to distinguish himself aside in order to thank his friend who made this all possible, their friendship being stronger than Mark's desire to stand out. Now, though, under Sean's influence, Mark betrays his only friend and pushes him out of the company. Later that day, Facebook hits 1 million members and Sean throws a party to celebrate. Eventually, the party is stopped by the cops and Sean is sent to jail on some pretty serious charges. He gets bailed out, but naturally this does damage to Facebook's reputation. Instead of taking accountability, though, he immediately begins blaming other people. He says he was set up, maybe by Eduardo, or even one of their new investors. Finally, Mark sees the person he was all along. Mark pushed everyone else away, chasing this dream Sean put in front of him. And when Sean finally disappoints him, he's left completely alone, without a single friend. In the present day, Mark sits alone, no doubt tired from the simultaneous lawsuits aimed at him, one being from the only friend he ever had. Desperate for some kind of human connection, Mark asks his lawyer to grab dinner with him, which she declines. His response is interesting here. He immediately says, "I'm not a bad guy." Erica's words clearly ringing in his head about why no girl would ever like him. Everything that has happened from the beginning of this film up to now, the creation of Facebook, meeting Sean Parker, becoming a billionaire, all was a result of Mark trying to get his mind off of Erica. And yet at the very end, he still can't escape her. Finally, he accepts his fate though. He finds Erica on Facebook and sends her a friend request. While, admittedly, it's unlikely that she'll accept, that isn't the point. During the last 5 minutes of this film, Mark goes from an anti-hero to a tragic one. Having lost everything, he finally aims to fix his mistakes. As humans, we're bound to make mistakes. Repeated and continuous lapses in judgment that cause us to hurt ourselves and the people around us. Rarely, though, are we put under the microscope and forced to relive our greatest failures and moments of insecurity. While this would no doubt be an unpleasant experience, there could potentially be many positive outcomes from it. And that's the exact situation Mark finds himself in. From what I've gathered, many find this ending to be funny. Mark sitting alone, repeatedly refreshing the page, desperate to see if Erica accepts the request. To me, though, it's pitiful. Mark felt that he needed to stand out, to distinguish himself from the crowd. But in reality, all he wanted the entire time was a real human connection. And the only person standing in the way of that was himself. He has all the money in the world and has clearly distinguished himself from the crowd, and yet he's not any better than he started out. Yes, The Social Network calls itself a biography, but in practice, it's so much more than that. The creation of Facebook merely serves as the backdrop for a classic tale of jealousy, friendship, and betrayal. These are elements you'd find in classic Shakespeare, which makes sense considering the writer is also a legendary playwright. These themes were found and will continue to be found in everyday life and relationships. That's why these stories have endured well past their expiration date, and it's why The Social Network earns its title as a modern classic.